Pesachim Daf Yud Aleph. Today is all about gezerot. We read a lot of times that the rabbis made a gezerah. They're worried this because of that, and a lot of times it can seem like why they choose in this case to make a gezerah and not in that case. Sometimes it might seem arbitrary, but we'll see in this stuff that the rabbis actually put a lot of thought into basic human psychology of when we are apt to confuse one situation with another, and when on the mass level people can keep things straight. Okay, a note of introduction is that the words gezerah shema, that phrase only appears in the Talmud Bavli, not in Tannaitic sources, not in the Talmud Yerushalmi. So while in earlier sources, sometimes they say, yeah, we're worried about this, but it's really the Talmud Bavli that develops it fully and makes a whole science out of it. And one day someone could do a psychological study on how the rabbis thought of human behavior and what kinds of actions are people get confused with and what kinds don't. All right, so that's the intro. Here's the outline of what we're going to see. We were talking about doing bedikat chametz after the time. I forgot to do it at night. I forgot to do it during the day, and now I'm in the middle of Pesach, and I realized, you know what? I never did bedikat chametz. I never checked the house. So what should I do then? Rabbanan, the majority says, go do b'dikah right now, and because you might have chametz in the house, and you might own it, or if you did bitul, maybe someone will find it. Go and find it all, and that way, whatever you find, you will destroy. So do b'dikah now. The Yehuda says, no, that's counterproductive, because if I'm going to go and look for chametz, I might find something, and then I might actually eat it, which will be much worse. Better to just leave it alone, and hopefully no one will find it, and leave good enough alone. So he's taking gezerah. If I find it, then I may come to eat it, and that will be worse altogether. So therefore, we see the Yehuda is more inclined to make gezerot. The Banan are less inclined to make a gezerah in like this. All right, that's what we saw. Now we're going to challenge this from the law of chadash, new grain. Any grain that grew during the year is not allowed to be consumed until we bring the omed on the second night of Pesach. How about preparing that grain from before, right? So I want to go, technically, the first grain I cut should be that barley grain that the Kohen will bring to the Bet HaMikdash. But what if I want to go beforehand and cut the grain and prepare it so that on the second day of Pesach, I'll have flour all ready to go? Rabbanan say not a good idea. If I allow a person to cut the grain and grind it and all that, they are going to come to eat it before Hadash. So leave it all on the stalks and don't use it. The Yehuda says it's fine. You can pre-process the grain, and people will be careful. You don't have to worry. You don't have to make a gezerah. So that's the contradiction between these two cases. The Banan don't make a gezerah regarding chametz, but they do regarding the Hadash, whereas Yehuda doesn't regarding chametz, and they do regarding and they don't regarding Hadash. So we have a double contradiction here. We're going to see three solutions for the Yehuda, one solution also for Rabbanan tucked in there. And then once we have a principle of the Yehuda's principle is going to be you make a gezerah when people are usually eat something all year round, like chametz. We're used to eating it, and so therefore you have to make a gezerah, especially on Pesach, because they have to keep people away from what their normal behavior is. Whereas chadash, which you're not eating all year round, right, and so you know that it's not allowed, you don't have to make a gezerah because people's normal behavior is that they're not going to eat it anyway for long term. And so that's the basic principle. We're going to question both sides of that principle. Is that true, that you make a gezerah when people usually eat something, and that you don't make a gezerah when people usually distance themselves from it? So we'll see a whole bunch of different cases that come up. And hopefully by the end, we'll have a good list of principles by which both Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda decided when to make a gezerah and when not to. Okay, so I hope that outline will be clear as we go back and forth. And so the question here is, Umi gazad Dilma atel mechal mine. You just told me that do not do. Biuda says do not do bedikat chametz on Pesach because I might find something and I may come to eat it, and that'll be a serious violation. Is that true that he makes that such a gezerah? V'hatenan. Mishekarav ha'omer yotzin or motzin shuke Yerushalayim shehen melein kemach vekali. Okay, the Kohen on the second day of Pesach would go out and he would cut some barley and he would wave it up and down. And at that point, the second he does that, all the grain from the previous year is permitted to be eaten. And so this Mishnah teaches that that very same day, if you went out to the marketplaces in Jerusalem, you would find them full of flour and toasted grain from the Chadash. In other words, the merchants, the sellers, had prepared all this grain and even ground it into flour beforehand, even though it was prohibited before, so that people could go that very day and buy it up, and they could start making masot for the rest of the holiday. It was important because probably the grain from the year before is already running out, and so this would be important to allow them to have new grain right away. However, the Mishnah says it was shelo b'rson chachamim henosin. The merchants did this with against the blessings of the sages. Sages, the chachamim here, did not like it because if they're preparing all this beforehand, then it's likely you have to worry that while they're preparing, they're going to consume some of that new wheat. So they didn't want people to prepare the hadash wheat. That's the words they better be meir. Rabbi Yehuda says it was good. The rabbis actually encouraged them. It's good, do this so that the people will have grain, make life easier for them. And he didn't worry that they're going to come to eat it. So that's our question. How come regarding Pesach, if you find chametz on Pesach, you might come to eat it, made a gezerah, don't look for it. But here he said, yes, go and prepare the grain before the second day, and he's not worried that people are going to come to eat from the hadash. So the answer is three answers. The first one, Amar Rava, Shane hadash mitoch shelo hitarta lo ela al yedei kituf hu zachur. Regarding hadash, there's another rule that if you're going to reap grain on during the year, that's hadash, only do it by hand. And that way you'll have a remembrance, right? How come I'm not using my tools? I'm doing it by hand because it's chadash. Oh yeah, that'll be a good reminder not to eat it. Okay, so that's why, because I do it in a different way. Whereas regarding b'dikat chametz, I'm not getting it in any weird way. Okay, that's fine for the guy who's actually reaping it, but then he puts in a basket, and it goes to the next place, and then someone else is going to come, and they're going to be grinding it and sifting it the same way they grind and sift all flour, and so they're likely to be to confuse the previous year with the current year's grain, and they will come to eat chadash. So what do you do about that? Well, no problem. Even that, Rabbi Yehuda must have required that this all be done by hand. This is a mill here. Usually they'd use a big mill that was drawn by animals or by water. And so if you use just a small hand mill, or you use a sifter and use it upside down, and that will be a reminder that this is chadash. I'm preparing the flour now, but I'm not going to use it. And so that's why he didn't make a gezerah, because we're preparing it in a shinui, in a different way. All right, but all that doesn't work because of the following. Ela haditnan kotzrin bet hashlachin v'sheba'amakin avalo godshin. We have another Mishnah that says if you have some grain that's in an irrigated field or in a valley, and so this grain is not as top quality as the other grain, and so you wouldn't use it for the omer, and it or another explanation, it ripens earlier. Anyway, the grain that grows in these places, kotzrim, you're allowed to reap it. So it sounds like you're allowed to reap it in a normal way, as long as you don't pile it up. And we established in a different place that is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda does not require cutting it by hand. He allows you to use tools regarding this grain. So you see that it actually is prepared the same way other grain is prepared, and therefore Abaye rejects that first answer of Rava. So so therefore Abaye is going to have a second response to this. The second response is chadash badil mineh. Hames labadil mineh. Right. This is going to be the main response that we're going to we're going to question a lot. So hadash, a person is going to distance himself from, because he knows from the beginning of the year all this grain is prohibited. It's prohibited all the time for many months, and so he's going to make sure he's going to keep it to the side, and he's has in mind he's not going to eat it. It's like something not kosher today, pig. You don't have to think about it. If you have pig in front of you, you're not going to eat it because it's always prohibited. So you're not going to come to make a mistake. Chametz, however, labad yamaneh, people do not distance themselves from chametz because chametz is permitted almost all year round, except for just 7 days. And therefore, it could be on Pesach, if you have chametz in front of you, you're just going to eat it automatically. And then you're going to realize, oh, I forgot it's Pesach. And so you don't have that psychological boundary because it's only prohibited for a very short time. And that's the difference why the Biudah does make a gezerah regarding chametz. It says don't do bedikah, and he doesn't make a gezerah regarding chadash, and he says you can prepare the new grain even before the omed is brought.
Rabbi, I know it's off topic, but I'm just curious. For chadash, is the halacha, like can it be not mixed, but is it like chametz in a sense, or pig that it is batel in a certain amount, or is it like just like the idea behind it, or?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's not kosher, but it is something that can become kosher if you just wait long enough, right? So actually, for some halachot, that actually makes it more stringent. Since you can just wait a while and then it'll be kosher, you may as well wait and don't eat it, right? Whereas pig, if a little pig falls in, then we do say batel. So that's a good question. I'm not prepared to fully answer that. But. Okay. Good. Amar Rava, de Rabbi Yehuda ad Rabbi Yehuda kashya, de Rabbanan ad Rabbanan la kashya. Okay, so now, yeah. Okay, so Rava says, yeah, we have a question regarding okay. Now Rava is questioning Abaye. He says, okay, maybe you solved it according to the Biudah, but what about for Rabbanan? See, we have back to the outline. Rabbanan also, we have a question because they said you can do bedika and you don't make a gezerah regarding chametz, but they said don't prepare the chadash because you may come to eat it. So they do make a gezerah there. So what about Rabbanan? How can we answer that response? So that's what we're going to see here. He's going to say that he himself is searching for it. So the guy searching is not going to eat it. So the Biudah lakasha kedeshanenan. We already had two answers for the Biudah. The Rabbanan ad Rabbanan nami lakasha hu atzmo mechazer alav lesorfo bechal kachil mineh. While you're in the act of searching, what am I doing? I have a flashlight. I'm going around. I'm looking for hametz. So now I find it. I'm going to eat it, right? My whole point is to search for it, to destroy it. I don't have to worry that I'm going to actually use it. This is like, people, if police are looking for drugs, are you afraid that if they find it, then they're going to use them, right? Their whole point, they're law enforcement. They're going to find them to get rid of them. Okay, so we solved that. Rav Asher now has a third response for the Biudah. Rav Asher Amar, Rabbi Yehuda ad Rabbi Yehuda lakashya kemach vekalitenan. So he says in that first Mishnah that says the merchants would put out grain. What kind of grain are they putting out? They're putting out flour and toasted grain, which is are not edible. Flour is not edible, so you don't have to worry that people are going to eat it beforehand because it's a raw material, and so then they'll take it home afterwards and they'll bake it into masa. So that's why we don't have to worry because it's not edible. All right, does that work? Not really. De Rav Asher bedutahi, an amazing statement. He says this answer that Rav Asher said is an error. Beduta, right? It's made up. It's fake. Why? Okay, we understand once you made it into toasted grain, in other words, dried out, or flour, you're right, it's not edible. But beforehand, while it's still soft, it was edible. So, it's going to have to get to the end point. It's going to have to go through a process. And during the process, it is edible. So we should worry that someone might come to eat it. So therefore, his answer does not make any sense. And if you want to say, and if you want to attribute to Rav Ashi the first answer that we gave to Rava, the fact that he pulls it out by hand and doesn't use, so it does it in a different way, it doesn't use a tool. We already rejected that at first answer because we can use a tool in these irrigated fields. Baduta, and therefore we say that Rav Ashi's statement is rejected. This is it happens on other places, but it's pretty unusual. A lot of times we say, okay, we disagree, but to say someone is this is just a mistake. And what do they mean by a mistake? That Rav Ashi didn't say it, or he said it, but it's an error on his part. Okay, so pretty strong words. Now, it's worth looking at the manuscripts on this word, because while the printed editions say baduta and baduta, Munich manuscript also says bedita. However, the Yemenite manuscript, which is the best one, says barita. Also, this one, the Sason Ashkenazi one, says barita and baruta, baraita, and there's a Geniza fragment that says barita. So you see, really, the vast majority of manuscripts, and very good ones, don't say with a dalid, but rather with a resh. Barita or baraita means outside, bad, right? This is an excluded statement. The same as the word baraita, which means a Tanaitic statement that was excluded from the Mishnah, and so it's not as bad as saying baduta. It's just saying this is not part of the canon. This is not an authorized statement for inclusion.
So much for an entire page on nice language and being nice to people, huh?
Right. Well, truth is truth. We got to, we has to make sense, and so we have to have some standards. And well, Baraita saying, step outside is at least nicer than saying it's a complete error. Okay, good. Now we question. So now let me just show you the outline of the next section. Right. So Abaye established this principle here, that whenever it's something that people usually are accustomed to doing, you need to make a gezerah. Whereas when it's people keep a distance generally, then you don't need to make a gezerah. So we're going to ask on both halves of this statement. So on the first half. Anytime it's something that you're used to doing, is it true that Rabbi Yehuda will make a gezerah? Here's a case where they don't, and you know this one by heart. לא יקוב אדם שפופלת של בשר וימלא עין השמן ויתננה בסדנר בשביל שתהיה מנטפת ואפילו היא של חרס ורבי יהודה מתיר הטעם. Okay, so that's the Mishnah, which we read every week, but let's also explain it, unless you remember it from Masechet Shabbat. Okay, if you have a lamp, right, and you want to get some extra time out of it, it's like an extra battery pack. Remember on the cell phones, people used to put an extra battery pack that stuck out? So you take an eggshell and you make a little hole in the bottom and you fill it up with oil. And that way the oil will drip in slowly, and it will, that way the lamp can last a long time. It will last the whole night. Now, are you allowed to do this on Shabbat? So it says lo yikov. No, you cannot make a hole in the egg shell and fill it with oil and put it next to the lamp, even if it's made out of clay. Or in other words, even if you make this thing out of clay, why? Why is this a problem? Because they're afraid that you might take from the oil. If I'm sitting there and I'm having some salad, I say the salad could really use some oil on it. And so then I take this and I take a spoon, I take a little bit of oil out of it, put on my salad. That is a problem, because then the fire will go out sooner. And causing the fire to go out sooner is extinguishing on Shabbat, which is prohibited. And so therefore, do not do this, even if it's made out of clay, and clay will make it, this tends to be slimy and disgusting, and it's not going to be so edible. Even so, we worry that a person might come and take it. So Tanakh Kama says, we do make a gezerah. Rabbi Yehuda matir, he says, you don't make a gezerah. So that's the question. Here is something that's oil. Oil people eat all year round, all the time, and so they're likely to come and take the oil, and yet the Rabbi Yehuda does not make a gezerah. Why not? The answer is Hatam Mishum Chumra, the Shabbat Mabdil Bedile. Shabbat is exceptional. Shabbat is so stringent, and when Shabbat starts, there's so many things that you're being careful of. So you'll know it's Shabbat, and you'll know that this is a lamp, and you're not going to come to touch it or to take the oil from it. And even though oil is permitted all week long, this is not a problem. All right, that's a good answer. So this is another principle, right? That it depends on what the day is, what the atmosphere is. Okay, now since you mentioned Shabbat, I have an internal question regarding Shabbat. V'lamed Shabbat Shabbat. The Tanya Chebel Dili Shenifsak Lo Yehe Koshro Ela On Bo. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Korech Alav Punda O Pesikya Wilbad Shelo Ya'an Bennu. All right, so this baruta teaches that if I had a bucket on a rope, so I'm using it to pull up water from a well, and the rope broke, snapped. I'm not allowed to tie it with a regular knot, because making a regular knot on Shabbat, remember, now we're back to Shabbat. Making a regular knot is prohibited. Rather, onvo, make a bow. That's a temporary knot, and then you'll be okay. That's Tanakama. The Biuda says, no, don't even make a regular bow. Rather, just take a belt or a sash. The first one's like a money belt, like a fanny pack. And you take the belt and you tie it around both ends of the rope. And so you tie it together. You kind of make a temporary connection there, and that's fine. Just don't tie it. So now, what's the reason for the biuda? We're assuming right now that it's a gezerah, right? Why can't you make a bow? A bow is permitted because it's temporary, but then you may come to make a regular knot. If you think you can make a bow, people are going to forget and not distinguish. And so you see that the biuda does make a gezerah on Shabbat. How come he doesn't say what we just said? Shabbat is very important and people will be careful. So that's a question. Kashya de biuda, ad biuda. And we also have a question, Kashya de Rabbanan, ad Rabbanan. In this case, the rabbis say, make a bow, it's okay. Don't worry about making a knot. You don't have to make a gezerah. And yet, in the case of the oil, they say, don't do this because you may come to take oil. So how come they do make a gezerah on oil and they don't make a gezerah regarding the knot? So we have a double question here. All right, let's answer both. The Rabbanan ad Rabbanan la Kashya. Shemen b'shemen michalaf, aniva b'keshira la michlaf. Their answer is oil, right? And all oil looks the same. And so since you eat oil all week long, it's easy to come to, someone might come and take it. Whereas a bow is different than a knot. If I say make a bow, I'm going to know I made a bow, and I'm not going to come afterwards to make a knot. They're two different items. So that's that visual people will have in mind, and they'll be careful with it. Okay, good. How about the biuda la kashya? Tama the biuda la mishum de gazar aniva atu keshira. Ela mishum de kasabar aniva gufa keshira hi. When the biuda says don't make a bow, but rather connect it with a belt, the reason is because he thinks that making a bow is like making a regular knot. He doesn't consider a bow to be a temporary knot. You can make a bow. Ask my kids. They tie their shoes once when they first buy them, and then never again. They slip in and out, right? So sometimes a bow could be also permanent. And so it's not because of a gezerah you might make a knot. He thinks that a bow itself is prohibited from the Torah. And so there's no reason to ask a question about the gezerah here, because it's not because of a gezerah. All right, good. Now, still within this topic, Verameh Rabbanan ad Rabbanan, Ditnan, Koshrin deli bepsika, avalo bechevel. Now, still on the topic, another source about knots on Shabbat, and Rabbanan will have a self-contradiction. Mishnah says you can tie a bucket with a sash or a belt, but not with a rope. A sash, but not with a rope. But Rabbi Yehuda matir, he says you can tie it with this chevel, now with a rope. Now this is strange. Chevel demai. What kind of rope are you talking about? If you're saying you can tie a regular rope to the bucket, but Rabbi Yehuda matir, kesher shel kayamahu. How could Rabbi Yehuda permit it? Then you're making a knot, and we know that he doesn't even let you make a bow. Forget a knot. And certainly that you're putting a rope there, and you're going to leave the rope forever. Once you tie it on Shabbat, you're going to leave it. So it's a permanent knot. So the pshat can't be that it's talking about a regular rope, or edla peshita de gardi. Must be talking about a weaver's rope. Weavers had a special rope that wasn't so strong, and they needed it. It was specially made for their weaving, for the loom. And so on Shabbat, all of a sudden, hey, we need a rope for the bucket. So the nearest one at hand is the weaver's rope. So we go and take it on Shabbat. But surely the weaver needs it. So right after Shabbat's over, he's going to start the weaving. He's going to say, hey, where's my weaver's rope? He's going to take it off the bucket. And therefore, by definition, it's a temporary knot because no one's ever going to leave the rope there. Okay, so even though it's a temporary knot, still the rabbis say it's prohibited. Why? Right? And here the rabbis do make a gezerah. Don't use this rope, the weaver's rope, because then you may come to use a regular rope. And so you see, they're talking about Shabbat, and yet they do, and they're talking about ropes, and yet they do make a gezerah. So how come they make a gezerah here and not before when they said you can make a bow, but you're allowed to make a bow, and we don't make a gezerah? So the answer is in chebed bechebed michalaf, aniva b'kshida la michalfa. So again, the same answer. It has to do with the optics of it. That a weaver's rope and a regular rope, they look the same. So people will remember, oh, one time I remember we tied a rope, and they'll forget that it was a weaver's rope because they look the same. So even though technically it would be allowed, that was a place to make a gezerah. But if they make a bow one time, they'll say, I remember one time we made a bow. Oh, but that was a bow. That doesn't mean I can make a knot. And people will distinguish between those two. Okay, good. So we finished that section of questioning, and now to get back to our outline. So again, we had the contradiction between Pesach and the new grain, and Abaye gave an answer. It depends on if it's something that you're usually used to eating versus not you usually used to eating. And so we questioned one side of that. Now we're going to question the other side of it. Is it true that you don't make a gezerah when people generally don't eat something, when they generally keep away distance? Then you should not make a gezerah. But we're going to see that he does make a gezerah regarding a bechor animal and bloodletting. All right, let's see what the case is here. No, sorry. Is that true that when it's something that people when something is generally prohibited, then the biuda says you don't make a gezerah because people will be careful anyway? What about this case? Bechor shahazod dam. Bechor, a firstborn animal is holy. You have to give it to the kohen. So generally, you'd give it to the kohen. If it does not have a mum, then the kohen will sacrifice it, and he'll eat a lot of the animal. So he'll get a nice dinner out of it. If, however, it gets a mum, it gets a blemish, then he can no longer eat it. He can benefit from a skin, but he can't eat it anymore. So now we have this bechor animal that got some kind of blood clot, achazod dam, and its life is in danger. If it dies, then the kohen can't use it, can't benefit from it. So the kohen wants to keep it alive. Afilu hu met en makizin lo dam. The solution to heal this animal would be to let blood, because it has blood clot. We need to let blood to allow it to go. I don't know if it was really worked, but anyway, that's what they thought, right? Dibre Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda is stringent here and says you cannot bloodlet the animal. Why? The problem is that you may make a blemish. You're not allowed to purposely cause a blemish in a bechor animal. Now, it is possible to let blood. I don't know this from experience, but apparently it's possible to do bloodletting by making only a minor incision that will not cause any permanent damage and will not be a mum. The problem is that if you allow the person to do that, they may come in another instance to help out the animal in such a way that does cause a mum. And so therefore, the biuda says it's not allowed. And so that is going to be our question. Here is a bechor. A bechor is something that generally people stay away from. It's prohibited all the time, right? And even though it's prohibited all the time, more like chadash, yet the biuda is making a gezerah here and saying, don't come to do bloodletting because you may come to cause it a blemish. That's going to be our question. But let's finish the baruta first. Says yes, you can do it. You can do bloodletting. Just be careful not to make a blemish. Okay. So the answer for the biuda is hatami toch shadam bahul Al mamono amrinan isharet le b'makom she'en osin bo mum, atel me'evad bimkom she'osin bo mum. The problem is here that the Kohen who's trying to take care of it, this is worth a lot of money. So he's all nervous because, if it dies, he's going to lose out. And because he's nervous about money, he's not going to be careful about this. And now, if you let him do it in this case, the next time when it breaks its leg or something, and he's going to have to do something that will cause it a mum, he's not going to be careful and not going to remember that this is allowed, but this is not allowed, and he's going to end up in another case causing it a mum. So you're right. Even though bechor in general is prohibited all the time, and people are careful because it's worth a lot of money, we have to make a gezerah. So that's another principle to add to our list, right? If people are worried about the money, then they're not going to be careful. Now, how about Rabbanan? Right? How are they going to answer that? How come in the Rabbanan or don't make a gezerah in this case, and in other cases they do? So Rabbanan kol sheken dila shadit le klal ate leme'evad. Right? How come the rabbis don't make the rabbis don't make a gezerah on chametz either? But how come the rabbis in this case aren't worried about the money, right? The money situation. Isn't the Kohen worried about money, and then he might come to cause a mum to keep his animal alive? And so the rabbis say no, kol sheken. If you don't permit him anything at all, then he's for sure going to make a mum. In other words, the rabbis are being lenient. They're saying, let the person do what they're permitted to do, so they won't come to do that which is not permitted. If you say it's all not allowed, then they're going to do something even worse. So this is like, you should permit someone to have one drink under your supervision rather than to have go and drink out of your supervision, and then they're going to have 10 drinks, right? So better to allow a little bit that's permitted, and a person will be more careful, and so we don't have to worry about that. Okay. Now we apply this principle that people are worry about their money, and that we legislate based on that. Does the Biuda really say that? Here's another case. And mekaderina behema biyom tov mipnei shu oseh habura aval mekarsefin. חכמים אומרים אין מרקדין, אין מקדרין, אף אין מekarsefin. Okay, animals, to take care of animals if they got bugs and itches inside under their skin, so they would comb the animal's hair with different kinds of combs. So that's the Mishnah and Masechet Betzah. And so and merakedim, you cannot scrape the animal on Yom Tov, because when you scrape it with that fine tooth comb, it's going to cause it to bleed. It's going to cause it wounds, and so you're not allowed to do that. Even though it makes the animal more comfortable, you can't do that. But you can do mekarsefin. You can use a wide tooth comb. It won't get all the bugs that are underneath, but it'll get the bigger ones, and so it'll give it some relief, and it does not cause a wound. So that's Biuda. He's lenient. Chachamim say, don't do anything at all. Don't do either, because it may come to make a wound. So now let's explain these terms. Tanya ezu kidur ezu kirsuf kidur ketanim ve'osin chabura. Kidur are small, have small teeth, and they do cause a wound. Kirsuf kedolim ve'enosin chabura. And so that's our question over here. This animal also, it's worth a lot of money, and you want to take care of it, and yet the Biuda says it's permitted, and you don't make a gezerah from the wide tooth combs, lest you come to use the thin tooth comb, then that will cause a chabura. So you see that a person takes care of his animal here, even though it's worth a lot of money. How come in the case of the bechor, he says you cannot do the bloodletting? Hatam di shabek le mayit. It's different. With the bloodletting, it has a blood clot. If you leave it alone, it will die. So the person will be very, very worried about it, and then he's not going to be careful, and he will come to violate. But in this case, even if you would leave the animal alone, the animal's not going to die. It will just be very uncomfortable. So he's not going to lose money. He's not going to lose the animal. And since he's not all worried about losing the animal, he will be careful to only use the wide tooth comb, and will not come to use the small one. Okay, good. And finally, the biuda ma'ishena gabe hames de gazar ma'ishena gabe kirsuf de lo gazar. Now to bring the first case all the way back with this last case, how come the biuda does make a gezerah regarding eating chametz? So don't do bidika at all, and he doesn't worry about you coming to use a small comb for if you use a big comb. Lechem v'lechem michalaf kidur bekirsuf la michalaf. The answer is that all bread looks the same. then he's going to see the bread and find it on Pesach. He's just going to eat it because it all looks the same. Whereas the different types of combs look different, and so he'll know I'm only allowed to use the big comb and not the small tooth comb. And so again, it's the optics that will help remind a person what's permitted and what's not permitted. All right, so that was a lot of different cases, and you see how the subtle distinctions that the rabbis make, and thinking about human behavior to make sure that we stay away. They want to permit whatever's permitted, but also help us stay away from isurim. All right, let's begin the next Mishnah, which is about the different times when things become prohibited. We'll only start the very beginning of this Gemara. Rabbi Meir Omer, ochlim kol chamesh v'sorfin betchilat shesh. It says you're allowed to eat chametz the entire fifth hour, which means from the fourth to the fifth hour. That would be like 10 o'clock till 11 o'clock. And then at the beginning of the sixth hour, in other words, 11:01, then you burn it. So he doesn't leave any time in between. Truth is, he added an hour because the prohibition starts at noon. So from the beginning of that hour, already burn it. And so you can go straight from eating it, eat your last bite, and then 2 minutes later, you burn the rest. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ochlin kol arba v'tolin kol chamesh v'sorfin betchilat shesh. Rabbi Yehuda adds a buffer zone. He says you can eat the entire fourth hour, in other words, from 9 till 10 o'clock. And then from 10 till 11, the fifth hour, you wait. During this time, you're allowed to own it. It can be around, and you can even may have benefit from it if you want to feed it to your animal or use it for something or other, but you can't eat it. And then at the beginning of the 12th hour, sixth hour, in other words, 11:01, just like the baduta, then you would start burning it. So they would actually burn their chametz at the same time. Now, furthermore, Odamar Biuda has these three sections. It's kind of a proof for his opinion that in the Bet HaMikdash they used to give a public reminder for the different times. They would take these loaves that were brought with the Korban Todah. You bring 40 loaves, 10 of them are chametz. So by this point, these loaves are going to become prohibited. They're pisulot anyway, so they can't be eaten. And so they put them on top of the columns, and everybody would see them. As long as the two loaves are up there, you go look. Oh, we can still eat. That's fine. Once they take one loaf away, then everyone stops eating. That's that middle hour from 10 to 11. You don't eat it, but you don't have to burn it yet. Once both of them are taken away, then everybody would start burning them. This is very important because they didn't have watches in those days. So they don't know exactly what time this is, and everybody's going to be have different times. When is what's going on. So this way, this is a big column. That way, everybody will be doing everything at the same time. And now Rabban Gamliel Omer, he adds a third opinion. Cholin ne'echalin kol arba. Utruma kol chamesh v'sorfin betchilat shesh. He basically agrees with Rabbi Yehuda. It just adds one thing, that any food you can eat during the fourth hour. But then you have to stop. Regular food, you have to stop eating at 10, from 10 to 11, can't eat it. But tiruma, because tiruma is holy food and you're not supposed to destroy tiruma. Therefore, as long as you technically can eat the tiruma, best to allow the Kohanim to eat it. And they'll be more careful. So the Kohanim only are allowed to continue eating chametz, that's tiruma, during the fifth hour. Hope that way they can finish as much as possible, and then that way they won't have to burn it all in the sixth hour. Okay, very good. It's just the beginning of the Gemara. Tanan hatam. Echad omer b'shnayim b'chodesh v'echad omer b'shlosha edutan kayemet sheze yodea be'iburo shel chodesh v'ze eno yodea be'iburo shel chodesh. This is a Mishnah Masechet Sanhedrin. What we're doing now is we're comparing what we just read about regarding times, and people didn't have watches. Not so clear to know exactly what time noon is, what time exactly is 11 a.m. So this affects witnesses. Two witnesses to a crime scene, right? And they come together and they say, we saw the murder happen, but they don't get the time exactly right. How big of a discrepancy do we permit and say, well, it's hard to know exact times, and how exact do they have to be? So that's the question. So let's say they get the date wrong. One of them comes and says it was the second of the month. The other says the murder happened on the third of the month. That's okay. We accept them because they can be a day apart. Because maybe they didn't know when Rosh Chodesh was. Rosh Chodesh can always be, on the 30th day, or it could be on the 29th day or the 30th day. And so, actually, right, it could be on the 30th day of the previous month or the next day after that. And so, since it's not publicized, immediately when the Rosh Chodesh is, someone might think it's the second day of the month, someone might think it's the third day of the month, and so we have to allow for that possibility, and they might be talking about the same day. Therefore, it's okay, right? Because one knows that they made the previous month an extra day, and this one didn't know. However, one says it happened on the third date of the month, and the other one on the fifth date of the month, then we throw them out. These are different days, right? There's no way to possibly legitimately confuse those days. So therefore, they must be lying. Their testimony contradicts. Okay, that's regarding dates. How about regarding times? Edutan kayemet. One said it happened in the second hour of the day. One said it happened on the third hour of the day. It's okay. We accept them. Because in the second hour, in other words, after sunrise. So one says it happened at 8. From 7 to 8. One said it happened from 8 to 9. That's okay because it's very difficult to distinguish. If you take someone outside in the middle of the morning and ask them exactly what the hour is, so that's a legitimate. That's within the margin of error. However, once is the third hour, and the other one's 2 hours off, then forget about it. People have some idea, right? They're not going to be 2 hours off. So that's beyond the margin of error. That's all the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who's pretty strict about this. However, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. And see, this is the same Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda as in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says, Edutan kayemet. I would accept that if they're 2 hours off, if they're both in the morning. However, אחד אומר ב5 ואחד אומר ב7, עדותן בטלה, שב5 חמה במזרח וב7 חמה במערב. However, if they are on different sides of noon, one says the fifth hour, an hour before noon, the other says an hour after noon, then we know that they're lying because everyone can tell the difference between when noon is and the sun is straight up, and the sun is on this side before, and then on the other side of the highest point in the sky. So everybody knows that. If they're in that discrepancy, then for sure we throw them out. Then we know that they're lying. Okay, so we see here that Rabbi Yehuda is more lenient than Rabbi Meir because he thinks people can get confused for over an hour and they can't tell the time. And so that's would also explain our Mishnah. Why does Rabbi Yehuda add an extra hour of being careful? This is because people aren't going to distinguish so well. It's going to be 11 o'clock, but people are going to think it's 10 o'clock. And so, and they might come to eat it at 11 o'clock. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says add an extra buffer. Rabbi Meir assumes that people do know the time more exactly, and most they'll be an hour off, but not 2 hours off. And so that ends up being a leniency regarding chametz, but a stringency regarding the acceptance of testimony of witnesses. Tomorrow we'll see more on these different times and the limits of the margin of error. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen.